The camera lights blazed, hot and unforgiving, bouncing off the polished studio desk where two women sat locked in quiet battle. America was watching. Millions at home leaned closer to their screens, already sensing that this wasn't going to be just another political panel. The tension was alive, electric, like the static in the air before a storm. And then Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, locked eyes with Pam Bondi, and unleashed a line that would echo across America. Pam Bondi had started the segment in her usual tone, smug, dismissive, a smile that wasn't really a smile but a warning. She had interrupted mid-question, waving her hand as though silencing her opponent with sheer entitlement. It was the same tactic she had used for years: take up space, talk over others, project authority even when the facts weren't on her side. To Bondi, this was routine. She had bulldozed countless guests this way, confident the cameras would reward her bravado. But this time was different. Across from her sat Jasmine Crockett unflinching. Composed eyes, locked not on the lights, not on the moderator, but directly on Bondi. She didn't flinch at the interruptions. She didn't raise her voice to fight for airtime. Instead, she let the silence build like a weapon. And when she finally spoke, her words cut with the precision of a blade sharpened by years of truth-telling. Bondi chuckled, leaning back as if Crockett's calmness was some kind of weakness. The smirk on her face suggested she was already preparing her next interruption. But before she could draw a breath, Crockett leaned in, her voice low yet commanding, each syllable weighted with purpose. It was the kind of tone that makes a room freeze, the kind that makes even the loudest adversary feel suddenly small. The studio itself seemed to pause. The moderator blinked, unsure whether to step in or let history happen. In that instant, millions at home forgot the scrolling ticker at the bottom of the screen. They forgot the usual noise of politics. What they saw, what they heard, was a confrontation stripped of pretense, a clash, not of talking points, but of dignity versus arrogance. And as Crockett's words landed, Bondi's smirk faltered, her eyes flickering with something rare, uncertainty. But what Crockett said next left Bondi stunned on the audience, gasping asterisk. This was a moment that carried weight far beyond the studio walls. Because Jasmine Crockett wasn't simply speaking as a congresswoman, she was stepping into the arena as a voice for millions who had long been drowned out, dismissed or talked over. She had come to embody something larger, the insistence that truth, dignity, and identity could not be bulldozed by arrogance. Pam Bondi, on the other hand, had built a reputation as a political attack dog. To her allies, she was relentless. To her critics, she was shameless. She had defended the indefensible, twisted narratives, and weaponized charm as a shield for contradiction. Whenever the spotlight hit, Bondi thrived on aggression. And tonight, she was certain the formula would work again. Interrupt, smirk, dominate, but the air was different. The stage was unforgiving, and the country was watching in real time. This wasn't a courtroom with filtered transcripts, or a backroom deal where words could be buried. Every phrase, every eyebrow raise, every tightening of the jaw was being clipped, captioned and shared within seconds across Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube. One misstep here could define a career. One well-placed line could shift a national conversation. Both women knew it. For Jasmine Crockett, the stakes were crystal clear. As a black woman in politics, every appearance on live television was more than performance, it was survival. The margin for error was razor thin. Her composure had to be flawless, her words airtight, her courage unmistakable. Every moment mattered. It's not just for herself, but for those who saw her as a reflection of their own battles. Immigrants fighting for recognition. Women demanding respect. Communities demanding truth. For Pam Bondi, the risk was of another kind. She entered convinced of her dominance, carrying the confidence of someone used to friendly moderators and sympathetic platforms. Yet on this stage, with millions of skeptical eyes, her polished performance had cracks. Every condescending smile, every hand wave, every smirk was not just directed at Crockett, was broadcast as a symbol of entitlement that audiences were increasingly rejecting. The tension built with every exchange. The moderator's questions became almost irrelevant. What mattered was the dynamic. Crockett's steady, piercing control against Bondi's impatient arrogance. It was more than political theater. It was a referendum on whose voice truly deserved the stage, and beneath it all pulsed a deeper truth. America itself was shifting. Audiences were tired of watching bullies dominate airwaves, tired of the dismissive tone that silenced women and minorities. They were hungry for something different, for a confrontation that didn't just recycle talking points, but forced accountability, dignity, and truth to stand tall against arrogance. That's why this mattered. This wasn't simply Crockett versus Bondi. This was dignity versus dismissal. Calm truth against weaponized arrogance. And in the live crucible of television, there would be no edits, no hiding, no chance to undo what unfolded. The country could feel it. Social feeds were already buzzing, speculating about how far Crockett would go, wondering if Bondi would finally meet a challenger she couldn't steamroll. The audience at home leaned forward, not just out of curiosity, but with anticipation. Sensing that history might be seconds away, everyone knew this was going to be heated, but no one expected what came next. Pam Bondi did not arrive at this moment by accident. She had spent years constructing her image as the polished, sharp-tongued, a prosecutor who never backed down, who spoke with the air of authority, even when the facts bent under scrutiny. To her supporters, she was fierce, unwavering, always ready for a fight. To her critics, she was the embodiment of hypocrisy, someone who cloaked ambition in the language of law and order. While quietly cutting deals that betrayed the very principles she claimed to defend, her career in Florida politics had been marked by contradictions. As Attorney General, Bondi built her reputation by presenting herself as a crusader for justice, a defender of victims. She spoke often about integrity, about the rule of law, about holding the powerful accountable. Yet behind that curtain, questions swirled. Critics pointed to her decision to decline joining a multi-state lawsuit against Trump University, a decision that coincided with a sizable campaign donation from Donald Trump himself. To many, it looked less like justice and more like favoritism, a transactional brand of politics that undermined her carefully crafted image. Bondi brushed off the accusations. Of course, she always did. With a confident smile and a dismissive laugh, she turned scandals into non-issues. Using the very tools she had mastered, projection, deflection, performance. In front of cameras, she knew how to dominate. She leaned on her practiced prosecutor cadence, her ability to sound firm even when her arguments were hollow. She was used to controlling the room not by reasoned debate, but by sheer volume and presence. When Donald Trump ascended to the presidency, Bondi found her next stage. She became one of his most visible defenders, especially during the impeachment battles. While legal experts across the country picked apart Trump's record, Bondi took to the microphones with unwavering loyalty. Turning complex constitutional crises into simplistic talking points, she waved away corruption as political theater, painted critics as hysterical partisans, and reframed scandals as attacks on freedom. It wasn't about persuasion, it was about spectacle. And in spectacle, Bondi excelled. She had silenced many before. Journalists cut off mid-question. Political opponents drowned out by her interruptions. Panels where her smirks and sharp tone kept challengers on the defensive. Bondi's strategy wasn't to win with facts. It was to unsettle, to overwhelm, to bully. She thrived in environments where confidence counted more than clarity, where her ability to dominate airtime became a substitute for truth. But behind the armor of arrogance, cracks were always there. Critics noticed how her arguments often faltered. Under close scrutiny, they saw the way she relied on dismissal rather than evidence, bravado rather than logic. They noted that her fiercest defenses came not when she was on firm ground, but when she was covering weakness. The more cornered Bondi became, the louder she grew. And so, by the time she sat across from Jasmine Crockett on live television, Pam, Bondi carried with her a well-earned reputation, the smiling enforcer of a political machine, the voice of entitlement dressed as righteousness. She was used to getting the last word, used to having moderators give her space out of deference, used to opponents folding under her pressure. In her mind, this was just another stage to dominate. But the stage had changed. America had changed. Viewers were no longer charmed by smirks that dismissed real pain, no longer accepted arrogance as authority. They were watching with sharper eyes, hungrier for accountability, less willing to let the old tricks go unchallenged. That was the danger Bondi didn't see. She assumed Crockett would be just another opponent to talk over, another voice she could silence with a wave of the hand or a mocking laugh. She thought the playbook would work because it always had, but tonight, she met her match. The very tactics that once made her untouchable would, in this setting, become the rope she used to hang her own credibility. And as the night unfolded, Bondi's confidence would begin to falter. Her smirk would stiffen, her words would stumble. And the woman who once seemed invincible on camera would discover what it meant to be truly cornered, because this time, she wasn't facing someone who played by her rules. She was facing Jasmine Crockett, calm, unflinching, and ready to dismantle her with precision. Asterisk, long before Jasmine Crockett sat under the searing lights of a national broadcast, she had been forged in the quieter, harder fires of grassroots struggle. She didn't come from privilege, nor did she have the cushion of elite connections to smooth her path into politics. What she carried instead was grit, shaped by community, by lived experience, by the sense that if she didn't fight for justice, no one else would. Her story began in neighborhoods where the promise of America too often felt like a distant echo. She saw up close how working families juggled impossible choices, RF, medicine, or bills. She saw how power tilted toward the wealthy, while the most vulnerable bore the weight of every decision. These weren't abstract policy questions. To her, they were daily realities that cut into the lives of people she loved. And so, when Jasmine Crockett spoke, it was never just politics, it was personal. From her earliest days, she had the courage to raise her voice when silence seemed safer. In classrooms, in community meetings, in the streets, she was the one who asked the uncomfortable questions, who challenged authority when it veered into arrogance. That same fearlessness carried her into law, where she defended those who couldn't. Afford high-priced attorneys, where she stood beside families navigating a justice system stacked against them. Each case, each client, each sleepless night at her desk added to the reservoir of composure and moral clarity. She would later carry on to the national stage, but the path wasn't easy. She faced setbacks, rejections, and the endless grind of trying to do right in a system designed to reward the powerful. As a young black woman, every step forward was shadowed by doubt not her own. But the doubt cast by others who underestimated her, dismissed her, or tried to box her into silence. She had been called too sharp, too passionate, too much. But what others labeled as too much, she wore as armor. Her sharpness became her strength, her passion, her fuel. Her refusal to shrink her presence, the very reason she rose. Her reputation grew not because she played it safe, but because she didn't. She was known for her comebacks. Those sharp, unflinching lines that sliced through arrogance with precision. People began to clip her speeches, share her takedowns, celebrate her unwillingness to bend. In a political culture too often dulled by rehearsed talking points, Crockett's authenticity stood out. She wasn't there to score sound bites. She was there to speak truth, even if her voice shook, even if it made the powerful squirm, and it cost her. Speaking truth meant losing allies, drawing fire, and putting herself at risk. It meant withstanding attacks from those who felt threatened by her clarity. Yet with every insult hurled her way, she grew steadier. With every attempt to sideline her, she became harder to ignore. What her critics didn't realize was that every battle, every slight, every dismissal had only made her sharper. They had trained her for this very stage. By the time she entered Congress, Crockett had already become something rare, a politician who felt less like a polished brand and more like a mirror. Communities saw themselves in her. The immigrant family, struggling for dignity. The working mother balancing 3 jobs. The young activist who didn't want to give up on hope. They all recognized something in Jasmine Crockett, a reflection of resilience, of pride, of survival against odds. Wasn't perfect, and she didn't pretend to be. But that was her strength. She wasn't selling perfection. She was offering honesty. That honesty came with fire. In committee hearings, she had already shown flashes of brilliance that left seasoned politicians stumbling. She became known for her fearless willingness to call out hypocrisy, to demand clarity, to slice through legalese with the kind of bluntness that made headlines. Clips of her sharpest lines began circulating widely, celebrated by audiences who longed for anyone willing, to say out loud what so many were thinking, and that reputation followed her into this broadcast. The producers knew it, the moderator suspected it, and even Pam Bondi sensed it, though she refused to admit it. Crockett wasn't just another guest. She was a truth-teller with an audience already primed to cheer her on, waiting for the moment when her precision would cut through the noise. What Bondi didn't realize was that Crockett's calm wasn't weakness. It was the calm of someone who had been here before, not in this exact arena, but in battles just as intense. She had faced down dismissive judges, sneering opponents, and critics who underestimated her. Each encounter had taught her something. That composure was not silence, that patience was not surrender, and that dignity, when wielded with precision, is the most devastating weapon of all. And so, as the lights came on and the nation tuned in, Jasmine Crockett wasn't rattled. She wasn't intimidated by the smirks, the interruptions, or the arrogance across the table. She had been training for this her whole life. The first interruption came almost before Jasmine. Crockett had finished her sentence. Pam Bondi leaned forward, hand raised in that familiar wave of dismissal, her voice cutting across the studio. It was the same tactic she'd mastered for years. Jump in, drown out, seize the floor by force. No, that's not true, Bondi snapped. Her words tumbling over Crockett's in a rush of manufactured authority, but Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice, didn't scramble for space. Instead, she paused, letting the interruption hang heavy in the air. Viewers could feel it. The silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. She waited for Bondi to finish her practiced rant, then calmly, firmly delivered her reply. Her words were short, sharp, and precise, like a pin aimed at the inflated balloon. Of Bondi's arrogance, Bondi's smirk twitched. She tried again, louder this time, her tone rising as though volume could substitute for truth. She talked over the moderator, waved her hands, leaned on familiar talking points. But Crockett parried with ease, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering. Every time Bondi swung wide with bluster, Crockett countered with fact, composure, and that unshakable calm that only made Bondi look more desperate. The audience began to notice. There was a ripple of laughter when Crockett sidestepped Bondi's interruption with a one-liner that sliced straight through her argument. Even the moderators' lips curved into the faintest smile, though he tried to maintain neutrality. Applause bubbled up when Crockett doubled down, her words carrying the rhythm of both truth and performance. The kind of cadence that turns an exchange into a moment. Bondi grew visibly rattled. Her interruptions became less crisp, her phrases more jumbled. She began repeating herself, relying on slogans instead of substance. Her eyes darted toward the moderator for rescue, but none came. The cameras caught it all, the tightening of her jaw, the frustration rising in her voice. The faint cracks in the mask of control she had worn so confidently at the start. Crockett, by contrast, looked unbothered. She leaned back slightly, composed, as though she had all the time in the world. Every so often, she tilted her head, smallest smile playing at the corners of her mouth, as if to say, "I see through you." Each parry landed not just as a rebuttal, but as a lesson in composure, a reminder to the millions watching that arrogance collapses when met with unshakable dignity. The tension in the studio thickened. Applause grew louder with each exchange, laughter sharper with each failed attempt by Bondi to regain control. It wasn't just a debate anymore, it was a dismantling. And everyone in the room could feel the shift. By now, Bondi's smirk was gone. Her voice carried an edge of fury, words tumbling faster as she tried to overwhelm her opponent with sheer force. But Crockett never raised her volume. She spoke with measured conviction, her every word amplified not by shouting, but by the silence that followed, the silence of an audience hanging on each syllable. Bondi had walked into the studio expecting to dominate. Instead, she was being outclassed, outmaneuvered, and outshined. The contrast was cinematic, the rattled arrogance of the old guard against the fearless composure of a rising voice. And then, as the studio buzzed with tension, Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, her eyes fixed, her voice quiet enough to force everyone to lean in. She delivered a line so devastating, so precise, that the room fell still. For a beat, the studio held its breath. Crockett leaned forward, her voice steady, almost quiet. So quiet it forced every ear in the room to sharpen. And then she said it. The line was calm, precise, devastating. A single sentence that cut cleaner than 1,000 arguments. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't wrapped in theatrics. It was delivered with surgical exactness, the kind of truth that didn't need volume because it carried the weight of self-evidence. The pause after was electric. Bondi froze. For the first time all night, she had no words. Her mouth opened slightly, as if to form a reply, but nothing came. The silence that followed was louder than any applause in audience, collectively registering that they had just witnessed something irreversible. And then the room broke. Ripple of gasps gave way to laughter, then applause, then a roar of approval that shook the set. People clapped, whistled. Some even stood from their chairs. The moderator blinked in disbelief, caught between his duty to maintain order and the realization that order had just collapsed into spectacle. Bondi's face told the whole story. Her trademark smirk had shattered. Her jaw tightened, her nostrils flared, the muscles at her temples strained, as though she were clenching her teeth hard enough to crack them. She tried to force a comeback, but her voice betrayed her, hit rose in pitch, her words tumbling out too fast, rushed and defensive. What had once been her strength, the ability to dominate with bravado, now sounded shrill, almost desperate. Crockett, meanwhile, didn't even move. She stayed perfectly composed, leaning back slightly in her chair, watching Bondi unravel with the kind of serene detachment usually reserved for a chess player, calmly observing an opponent realize they're in checkmate. Every flicker of Bondi's fury only highlighted Crockett's cool control. The cameras caught it all. Bondi's face reddening, her hands gesturing wildly, her voice climbing into a near shout. Crockett's stillness, a study in composure, formed the perfect counterpoint. It was cinematic, chaos on one side, poise on the other. In living rooms across the country, viewers leaned closer to their screens. Some laughed out loud, others shook their heads, many grabbed their phones. By the time Bondi was still sputtering through her flustered rebuttal, social media was already on fire. Tweets were flying. Did y'all just see Crockett end Bondi in one line? Game over. That's how you shut down arrogance. This is the political mic drop of the year. Clips were clipped, memes were minted. Reaction videos were already being drafted by creators who knew they had just been handed viral gold. Inside the studio, the moderator finally tried to step in, urging for calm, trying to reset the debate. But the balance had already shifted permanently. Bondi's fury was no longer intimidating, was flailing. Crockett's composure was no longer defensive. It was dominant. Bondi's next attempt at a comeback fell flat, smothered by the memory of that knockout line. Even as she talked, you could feel the audience wasn't listening. They were still replaying Crockett's words in their heads, savoring the sting, waiting for her to speak again. Crockett finally did. Not with another bombshell, but with a gentle, almost casual Adana, small, measured follow-up that didn't try to outdo her own moment, but simply reinforced it. It was like hammering the final nail into a coffin that was already sealed. Bondi's fury boiled. Her voice grew louder, her sentences less coherent. She began cutting herself off mid-thought, circling back, repeating phrases as though trying to recover lost ground. But the more she spoke, the more ground she lost. Crockett's eyes never wavered. Her posture never broke. Even when Bondi's words rose to a near yell, Crockett sat calm, her silence itself a weapon. It was the contrast of the storm against The still water that made the unraveling of Bond is so painful to watch. At one point, a laugh escaped from the audience during one of Bondi's furious rants. It wasn't just laughter, it was dismissal. And that, more than anything, signaled the true shift. She wasn't feared. She was being mocked. Social media was already exploding while the cameras were still rolling. On TikTok, users clipped Crockett's line with slow-motion replays and dramatic music overlays. On Instagram, screenshots of Bondi's stunned silence were turned into memes within minutes. On Twitter, hashtags trended instantly, with viewers christening the moment as the night Crockett broke Bondi. In real time, the debate was morphing into cultural theater. Every flicker of Bondi's fury, every inch of Crockett's calm, was captured, looped, remixed, and broadcast to millions beyond the studio walls. By the time the moderator tried to pivot to the next topic, it was too late. The debate had ended for most viewers the moment Crockett dropped that line. Everything after was just background noise, filler before the highlight reel could be uploaded. And yet, what no one in that studio fully realized was that the true shockwaves wouldn't be confined to that night. The cameras were capturing more. Than a clash, they were documenting a turning point. A moment that would not just trend for a day, but ripple outward into headlines, into analysis, to political folklore. Because if Bondi came in expecting to intimidate, to dominate, to remind the audience of her legacy, she walked out with the opposite. She had been dismantled. Live in front of the nation, and Jasmine Crockett. She walked out not just as the winner of a debate, but as the architect of a viral moment that would define the night and, maybe, her career. Asterisk, the debate had ended. But in truth, the real battle was only beginning, within minutes of the broadcasts. Closing credits, the moment was already racing across the digital bloodstream of America. Twitter lit up first, with a torrent of posts that cascaded like wildfire. Screenshots of Jasmine Crockett's steady gaze, frozen mid-clapback, ricocheted across timelines plastered with captions like "Queen Energy" and "When Truth Speaks, Arrogance Trembles." A single hashtag, #Crockett, vs Bondi, shot from obscurity to trending #1 in under an hour. TikTok was next. Within the first wave of uploads, users clipped the exact moment of Crockett's mic drop counterattack, layering it with booming sound effects, flashing captions, and reaction stitches. One viral edit replayed Crockett's line in slow motion, the words echoing like a courtroom gavel slamming down.
Oh.
Before cutting to Gen Z creators gasping, clapping, and throwing on imaginary wigs to mimic Bondi's shocked face. The format caught fire. By midnight, thousands of variations flooded feeds, each one remixing Crockett's takedown into a cultural anthem. On YouTube, political commentary channels wasted no time. Thumbnails screamed with titles like, "Crockett Destroys Bondi Best," "Takedown of the Year," and "Pam Bondi Didn't See This Coming." Long-form breakdowns appeared within hours, dissecting every glance, every pause, every tightening jaw muscle that marked Bondi's unraveling. Analysts who had once dismissed Crockett as a rising rookie now hailed her as a commanding force. The replay numbers didn't just climb, they exploded. 10 million views, then 15, then 20. By the end of the week, Crockett's moment had entered the rarest tier of modern politics, the cultural crossover clip. Commentators praised not just the line itself, but the poise with which it was delivered. This wasn't anger. This wasn't chaos. This was precision. That became the narrative. Crockett was painted as the calm surgeon of truth, slicing through years of Bondi's bluster with surgical grace. Mockery rained down on Bondi in equal measure. Memes spread of her frozen face, wide-eyed, as though she had just been caught off guard in the very arena she once dominated. The internet relished every frame of her fury. Celebrities joined in. A-list actors, musicians, and comedians shared the clip, often with nothing more than a fire emoji or a crown. Influencers with millions of followers rewrote Crockett's words as motivational captions, pairing them with everything from gym selfies to protest footage. Suddenly, Crockett's voice wasn't just part of a debate, it was a soundtrack of defiance stitched into the daily scroll of millions. Politicians, too, sensed the moment. Progressive leaders amplified the clip, framing it as the crystallization of a generational shift. The era of polite silence is over. The era of fearless truth has arrived. A senator tweeted, "That's how you stand up to bullies, Rackin." Up hundreds of thousands of likes. Grassroots organizations seized the momentum, cutting Crockett's line into campaign videos, plastering it onto fundraising emails, turning one viral moment into a rallying cry. The ripple effects reached further than anyone could have predicted. News outlets dedicated prime segments to analyzing the exchange, framing it not as a skirmish, but as a cultural clash: justice versus arrogance, authenticity versus spin. Bondi's reputation, once unshakable among conservative media circles, suddenly felt brittle. Every replay reminded viewers of her silence, her fumbled words, her visible loss of control. For a figure who had thrived on projecting dominance, it was the kind of wound that lingered. Meanwhile, Crockett was elevated overnight. Invitations to primetime shows poured in. Requests for interviews doubled, then tripled. She became the face not just of a fiery debate, but of a broader hunger, a demand for voices unafraid to puncture the theatrics of power with the simplicity of truth. Commentators began comparing her to other icons who had risen from obscurity through a single televised moment. But this time, the digital echo chamber was louder, faster, and far more unforgiving. What made it resonate so deeply was that Crockett's victory wasn't crafted in a back room or polished by consultants. It was live, raw, undeniable. In an era where spin dominates and authenticity is scarce, her words landed like a thunderclap of reality. Viewers who had never heard her name before now felt like they knew her, trusted her, rooted for her. The bond between speaker and audience had been forged in real time, under the glare of the cameras, and it was unbreakable. As the days stretched on, the memes grew sharper, the praise louder, and the fallout heavier. For Bondi, the questions mounted. Could she recover? Could she reassert control of her narrative? Or had she finally met an opponent who turned her greatest weapon, her dominance on camera, into her greatest liability? For Crockett, the horizon only widened. She was no longer just a rising star in political circles. She had become a cultural force, a symbol of resistance, and proof that one line, delivered with courage, could tilt the balance of perception. Nationwide, but even as the world celebrated, one truth lingered in the air. This was not the end. It was only the beginning of a storm. Because while the viral moment had electrified millions, the real battle was waiting just beyond the cameras. When it came, stakes would climb higher than anyone imagined. Asterisk. When the studio lights dimmed and the debate finally wrapped, the energy refused to fade. Jasmine Crockett knew the moment was bigger than a television sparring match. To her, it was never about humiliating an opponent. It was about something larger, something more enduring, the idea that truth still has power. Even in a media landscape drenched in noise and spectacle, Bondi's fury might have dominated the optics in the short term. Her clenched jaw, voice, her trembling insistence that she hadn't been cornered. But to millions who replayed the clip over and over again, the lasting image was Crockett's calm, her poise, her refusal to let arrogance and bluster intimidate her into silence. And this was the heart of the lesson. Calm courage in the face of rage could win. Integrity, when tested, could stand taller than years of political connections or talking point rehearsals. Crockett didn't just out-argue Bondi, she outclassed her, reminding viewers that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it simply refuses to bend. As analysts rushed to interpret what the clash meant, Crockett herself was strikingly clear. In interviews the following day, she didn't crow about her win or mock her opponent. Instead, she shifted the focus. "This isn't about me," she told a local station. "It's about what we deserve as a country, leaders who tell the truth, leaders who respect dignity, leaders who don't insult the intelligence of the American people." That humility cut deeper than any witty retort. For those who had been watching politics with a weary sense of despair, her words felt like oxygen. They reminded people that public service was supposed to mean something, That democracy wasn't meant to be a circus stage for those who could shout the loudest or twist facts the slickest. The contrast could not have been starker. Bondi had played the part of the political attack dog, snarling and snapping in defense of a brand of power that thrived on intimidation. Crockett, by comparison, looked like the future, steady, unafraid, unwilling to be bullied into compliance. And in that contrast lay the moral of the story. When arrogance meets authenticity, arrogance eventually crumbles. When corruption meets conviction, conviction endures. And when noise meets truth, truth has a way of ringing louder because it strikes not just the ears, but the heart. For communities who had too often felt voiceless, this was validation. Immigrants, working-class families, people of color, anyone who had been dismissed or talked over on national stages saw in Crockett a reflection of themselves. She wasn't just battling one person. She was embodying a larger struggle. She was showing that voices long sidelined could not only enter the arena, they could dominate it. Commentators noted it, but ordinary people felt it. They shared the clip with captions like, "This is how you handle a bully." They told their kids, "See? You don't need to yell to win, you need to stand tall." Reminded each other that, in a world that often rewards cynicism, there was still room for honesty and fire. Rooted in principle, the night's moral crescendo wasn't about one viral moment or one trending hashtag. It was about the possibility that courage could still change the course of a conversation. It was about the hope that politics didn't have to be endless mudslinging. That integrity could still break through, even if just for a moment, even if just on live TV. And so the broadcast left behind more than laughter at Bondi's expense or applause for Crockett's wit. It left behind a sense of possibility, a reminder, spark, because in the end, this wasn't just a clapback. It was a parable for a weary public, a parable that said, yes, the fight is uphill. Yes, the odds are steep, but truth can still triumph. Dignity can still resonate, and courage can still light the way. Asterisk, and so, we return to the moment that started. It all Jasmine Crockett destroys Pam Bondi on live TV. But let's be clear, Crockett didn't destroy her with rage. She destroyed her with something far more powerful: composure. She destroyed her with truth. In a world where shouting often drowns out reason, Crockett proved that dignity can still cut sharper than arrogance. Her calm conviction didn't just win the exchange, it exposed the hollowness of bluster, the emptiness of political showmanship. And in doing so, she reminded America of something we too often forget. Our democracy needs voices like this. Voices willing to hold the line. Voices willing to defend integrity when it's under siege. Voices that rise not for personal glory, but for the people they represent. That's why this clip went viral. That's why it struck such a nerve. It wasn't just entertainment. It was a glimpse of what leadership can look like when it's rooted in courage and principle. But here's the truth. One viral moment is not enough. If we want more of this SIF, we want truth to triumph over corruption, composure to defeat arrogance, we have to demand it, amplify it, and stand behind it. So here's your call to action. If you believe in standing up to arrogance with dignity, if you believe truth is still worth fighting for, then don't let this moment fade. Subscribe, share this video, leave your voice in the comments below.